At the last minute, the Pagoda of Longevity in the new Imperial Garden in northwestern Beijing was hastily pulled down. But why? This was not the only mystery associated with the park that would become known as the Summer Palace. What tales are told about the longest corridor in the world and the peculiar stage in the hall of listening to orioles? To find the answers, watch episode 3 of Untold Stories from the Summer Palace.
Overlooking the pier of natural affinity of water and trees on Lake Kunming at the Summer Palace, there is a large pavilion. It is the Pavilion of Buddhist Fragrance. Strangely, although it is the main building on Longevity Hill, the pavilion didn't appear in the original blueprints for Qingyi Yuan, the Garden of Clear Ripples, the name by which the Summer Palace was originally known. Emperor Qianlong, during one of his inspection tours of the south, made in the company of his mother, saw in the city of Hangzhou a building called the Pagoda of Six Harmonies. Both the emperor and the Dowager Empress fell in love with it and agreed that Qingyi Yuan should have its own pagoda to be called the Pagoda of Longevity. The design would be based on Hangzhou's Pagoda of Six Harmonies and the Pagoda of Longevity at Baowen Temple in Nanjing. Emperor Qianlong would visit Qingyi Yuan from time to time to find out for himself how the work on the pagoda was progressing. By the summer of 1758, 8 of the building's 9 tiers had been completed. On the 7th day of the 8th lunar month, Emperor Qianlong once again inspected the site. 2 days later, San He, the chief minister of the Office of the Imperial Household, which was in charge of the construction project, received an imperial edict. To his astonishment, the emperor ordered that the Pagoda of Longevity be pulled down. According to documents from the Qing Imperial Archive, building and then demolishing the pagoda cost 370 taels of silver, 1/10 of the entire sum spent on Qingyi Yuan. Why should the pagoda have been suddenly demolished when it was so near completion? One of the many theories put forward over the centuries is that the enormous weight of the stone structure was causing its foundations to sink. Another suggestion is that the spot chosen for the pagoda was considered inauspicious. Oddly, nothing about the emperor's decision is officially recorded in historical documents. Several explanations given at the time by Emperor Qianlong, the only person who could have known the real reason, are contradictory and ambiguous. In a poem he wrote, Records of His Demerits, Emperor Qianlong claims that the pagoda collapsed of its own accord. However, we know that this was not the case. It was pulled down on his orders. The emperor even contradicted himself later when he said the pagoda was demolished for reasons of feng shui. after a similar pagoda in Beihai Park in Beijing had been destroyed in a fire. On another occasion, Emperor Qianlong stated that it was inappropriate to have a tall pagoda in the northwestern part of Beijing. To support this argument, he claimed to be quoting from the Ming Dynasty volume Records on the Capital City. However, no such statement can be found in that book. As time has passed, the real reason why the pagoda was pulled down has become more and more difficult to discern. The theories abound. In records of his demerits, Emperor Qianlong wrote that the geomantic conditions in the north are very different from those in the south. That was why the spot was deemed unsuitable for a pagoda. The fact was, Buddhist pagodas in the south were built on terrain that was quite different from that in the north. The Pagoda of Six Harmonies in Hangzhou was built on a vast and open area of ground, and it was in harmony with its surroundings. Building a copy of it in Qingyi Yuan, the Garden of Clear Ripples, placed it in a different context. As the main building sited at the top of Longevity Hill, the pagoda would be the focal point of the entire garden. As such, it should be the finest structure in it. In reality, though, standing on Longevity Hill, the pagoda must have appeared isolated and completely out of proportion with the surrounding buildings. Taking into consideration the entire panorama of Western Beijing's 3 hills and 5 gardens, the Pagoda of Longevity should have been set off by Jade Peak Pagoda and the Pagoda of Divine Height on Jade Spring Hill to the southwest. The fact was, though, that the 2 pagodas to the southwest became an extension of the scenery in Qingyi Yuan. The 3 pagodas stood on the same east-to-west axis, creating a rather monotonous and repetitious effect. It seems possible that Emperor Qianlong became aware of this problem with the completion of the pagoda's 8th tier, and decided that in the interests of landscaping aesthetics, it must be corrected at whatever cost. And even though he was the emperor, he may well have felt ashamed at having wasted so much money. This would explain his reluctance to go into details about the destruction of the pagoda. There is no confirmation of this explanation in historical documents. It is a deduction, one based more on an understanding of the classical art of landscaping than on actual research. Emperor Qianlong ordered that the site vacated by the Pagoda of Longevity should instead have a wooden pavilion. That new building was the Pavilion of Buddhist Fragrance. The name Buddhist Fragrance comes from a passage in praise of the Buddha found in the Sutras. The pavilion was built on a 20-metre-high square stone terrace. The 41-metre-high pavilion is supported by 8 interior columns. The pavilion is octagonal in shape. It has 3 stories and 4 layers of eaves. Unlike the Pagoda of Longevity, which it replaced, the pavilion is in harmony with the terrain of Longevity Hill and with the buildings standing along the same axis in the garden. With longevity held to its rear, the pavilion of Buddhist fragrance faces south, apparently looking down over the surrounding scenery. Its position and inherent charm made it unquestionably the heart and soul of Qingyuan. Wherever you look, your eyes are drawn to this pavilion. The beauty of the pavilion of Buddhist fragrance changes according to the background against which it is viewed. But one thing that never alters is its imposing air. Seen from the west embankment of Lake Kunming, the pavilion reveals how in Qingyuan true harmony was achieved between the natural beauty of northern and southern China and the imperial architecture.
At the last minute, the pagoda of longevity in the new imperial garden in northwestern Beijing was hastily pulled down. But why? This was not the only mystery associated with the park that would become known as the Summer Palace. What tales are told about the longest corridor in the world and the peculiar stage in the Hall of Listening to Orioles? To find the answers, watch episode 3 of Untold Stories from the Summer Palace.
Located in front of Longevity Hill and just to the west is a building called Hall for Listening to Orioles. It consists of 2 floors and 5 rooms. It also has a theatre stage covering roughly 120 square metres. There's something quite unusual about this theatre. Unlike most theatres in China where the stage faces north, this one faces south. Although no one can say for certain what may have been the reason for this unusual arrangement, a story is told that may explain it. The Empress Dowager was a great fan of opera, and Emperor Qianlong often accompanied her to performances. One act in the Kunchu opera, The Beggar Picks Up a Gold Bar, is even thought to have been created by the emperor himself. It is also known that the emperor on several occasions appeared on stage to entertain his mother. Traditionally, the most exclusive seat in a theatre faces south. But since Emperor Qianlong was often appearing on stage, and he was still entitled to the best seat in the house, logically, in the Hall for Listening to Orioles, it was the stage that had to face south. Seen from above, Lake Kunming is shaped like a peach. Its form provides credence for another legend. It is that since Qingyuan was built to celebrate the birthday of Emperor Qianlong's mother, and since a peach is a traditional birthday gift, the garden was deliberately designed to contain a lake in the shape of a peach. Whether this is true or not, it is evident that filial piety is the theme of many of the garden's scenic spots. The Hall of Happiness and Longevity is surrounded by magnolias. These are trees Emperor Qianlong's mother was particularly fond of, and which feature prominently in the landscapes of the south. The trees were planted in Qingyuan on the orders of Emperor Qianlong. When the magnolias are in blossom, the air is filled with their fragrance. This is why the place came to be known as the Sea of Magnolia Fragrance. Beside the Rie River in Qingyuan, there was a street lined by numerous business premises. However, the shop owners and customers weren't real. They were all played by eunuchs, court maids, and ministers. The street was, in fact, another gift for the Empress Dowager from her son, the Emperor. During one of their tours of the south, Emperor Qianlong and his mother visited Shantang Street in Suzhou. The Empress Dowager had been delighted by Suzhou's water landscapes and the shops lining both banks of the river. However, the Empress Dowager couldn't travel very much and could only enjoy such sights occasionally. So Emperor Qianlong had a commercial street built for her in Qingyi Yuan. The street was also known as Suzhou Street. Along its 270-metre length, it was lined with more than 200 shops. In its layout, it was a copy of Shantang Street in Suzhou. There were, however, several premises that, with an archway front, were in the architectural style of the north. The shops all faced the river, and transactions could be carried out from on board a boat. The Empress Dowager was thus able to enjoy the laid-back lifestyle of southern China without ever leaving the capital city. A complex moral code was observed at the time designed to promote good governance. No aspect of this moral code was considered more important than filial piety. Emperor Qianlong, in his demonstration of filial love for his mother, also exhibited his devotion to Confucian tradition. This was important politically for the Emperor of Manchu, as it showed his adherence to traditional Han ethics. The Empress Dowager was particularly fond of walking through the long corridor and viewing the beautiful scenes depicted in it. The long corridor extends from the Gate of Greeting the Moon in the east to Shejiang Pavilion in the west. It links 4 octagonal pavilions, each symbolizing one of the 4 seasons. Liujia Pavilion for spring, Jilan for summer, Jiushui for autumn, and Qingyao for winter. The length between 2 pavilions was carefully calculated to be a comfortable walking distance of 300 paces. The long corridor is 728 metres in length. Today, it remains as structurally sound as when it was first built, and yet it is not supported by any stone or brick walls. It has survived for hundreds of years, thanks to the presence of the pavilions, which bring not only beauty to the long corridor, but also structural support. The long corridor was designed to follow the contours of the water and mountains. Like a winding ribbon, it links the various scenes along the foot of Longevity Hill. There are more than 10,000 colour paintings decorating the beams and crossbeams of the long corridor. They complement the natural landscape outside.
At the last minute, the pagoda of longevity in the new Imperial Garden in northwestern Beijing was hastily pulled down. But why? This was not the only mystery associated with the park that would become known as the Summer Palace. What tales are told about the longest corridor in the world and the peculiar stage in the hall of listening to orioles? To find the answers, watch episode 3 of Untold Stories from the Summer Palace.
One night in the second lunar month of the year 1780, an incident occurred in Qingyi Yuan. A night patrolman found a stranger in the Hall of Happiness and Longevity, a man by the name of Ho Yigung. He had simply wandered into the place while drunk. The officials were alarmed. The blame was laid on the ministers at the office of the imperial household and a number of other officials, and they were all fined. But this was not the first time an intruder had entered Qingyi Yuan. The fact was, the garden had no surrounding walls other than a section between Wenchang Pavilion and the West Palace Gate, so it was relatively easy for someone to wander inside. One reason why Qingyi Yuan had no walls was that the emperor and his family didn't actually live there. But another reason is found in the principles of traditional landscape gardening. Water Conservancy of the capital city, painted by the court artist Hong Wu, shows that to the east of the garden were vast expanses of fields, studded by villages and gardens. To the south were open plains, and outward from the western side there extended natural waters and paddy fields. To the west of the garden was Jade Spring Hill, and further west the Western Hills. To ensure that Qingyi Yuan and the rest of the area formed an organic whole, no wall was built around it. This way, the scenery in the garden could fuse with its surroundings and give the appearance of extending to infinity. This was one of the principles of classical Chinese landscaping. The most impressive feature of Qingyi Yuan is the way the beauty of the garden is enhanced by the mountains. The Western Hills provide a stunning backdrop. The foliage on Jade Spring Hill and Jade Peak Pagoda provide the middle ground, while the green fields at the foot of Jade Spring Hill and the garden itself comprise the foreground. The entire scene is like a traditional ink and wash painting, executed in different shades of colour. In the distance, the Western Hills serve as a natural screen, and in the foreground, Jade Spring Hill provides the backdrop to the 58-metre-high Longevity Hill, which appears much bigger than its actual size. The Western Hills and Jade Spring Pagoda are condensed into the scenery of the garden, providing a superb example of the Chinese landscaping principle of using the surroundings to enhance a garden's beauty. The art of creating a garden is often said to embody a nation's culture. Different cultures have nurtured different styles of gardens. Yuan Yuan, the Garden of Perfection and Brightness, was built before Qingyi Yuan. Yuan Yuan featured Western-style structures, an orderly layout, precise symmetry and ornamented carvings typical of a European garden of that period. Chinese landscaping, on the other hand, stresses harmony with nature and tries to avoid any trace of artificiality. Everything that is artificial is supposed to appear natural. To the rear of Longevity Hill, it's still possible to see the ruins of Gai Chuan Garden, or the Garden of Everlasting Spring, which was built at the time of Qingyi Yuan. Along the hill, the buildings were arranged on 3 tiers, and the buildings on each tier were linked with corridors or stone steps. The terrain had to be adjusted so that the buildings could stand at different levels. A feature of the entire complex was the open spaces. The Room of Clarity and Fitness on the 3rd tier of Gai Chuan Garden was Emperor Qianlong's study. The southern wall was bare rock, and today it's still possible to see verses written by the emperor engraved on this wall. The natural wall and artificial architecture combine in perfect unity to create a sense of great elegance in the study. The buildings in Qingyi Yuan, despite their different styles, all maintained a sense of harmony with the environment. This was especially true of the bridges, whether they were arched or part of a pavilion, or in any of a number of other styles. Towering dragon boats could pass easily beneath the Jade Belt Bridge, whereas by contrast, Jiu Bridge, or the Bridge of Understanding Fish, almost touched the water. The 17-arch bridge was 150 metres long, compared to the half bridge, which could be crossed in a single step. There were more than 30 bridges at the Summer Palace, encompassing almost every style of classical Chinese bridge design.
Qingyi Yuan became Emperor Qianlong's favorite place, but within less than a century, this beautiful park that had taken so much wisdom, effort, and passion to build would be destroyed in a huge fire. How did it meet its doom? And why would a leading figure at court, Prince Chun, oppose its reconstruction 13 years later? For the answers to these questions, watch the 4th episode of Untold Stories from the Summer Palace.